Okay, welcome back. This is part 5. We're going to talk a little bit about some glazing techniques now on this painting. We've been working on it. If you haven't seen the other parts on YouTube, part 1 through 4. But this is where I've taken it to kind of the detail stage that I wanted to stay here. But I want to do some glazes, colored glazes, spot glazes. That might just bring out some areas in the painting, make it a little more interesting. Sometimes I've saved paintings where I didn't really like them and I've brought glazes into it. A glaze is basically just laying down a really thin, transparent film of color on top. And I use, for glazing, I use these very expensive brushes from Home Depot. I think they're about 75 cents to $1 a piece, and they're kind of they're you know, kind of the cheapy ones, but they work really well for glazes. I also use these, yes, for pulling back some of the glazes out, and then just paper towels. I'm going to show you some techniques, and I usually glaze with, I like the product from Winsor Newton called Liquid. I've tried other products to glaze with, but this one I think I've had best results with. It is made to be a glazing medium. It's also a painting extender. And on this particular painting, I want to sometimes I'll just, especially if there's a lot of greens and cools, and of course I've got the sky. I know I haven't completed the sky. I kind of like how it is, but later on when my class gets into clouds, I'll probably work on the sky a little bit more. But I'm going to glaze some areas down here. And I'm going to start with burnt sienna glaze. Sometimes I'm going to reach into some burnt sienna, and I want to show you how I mix up my glazes. It's a bit of the paint here, and I'm going to pull quite a bit of the liquid. And you can see as I'm mixing this up, you can see how it is already very translucent. So there's quite a bit more medium than there is paint. You can mix back and forth if you want to pull a little more paint into it. I'm going to pull a little bit more medium here. You can already see how it's glazing right on top of my palette. But I think on this first one, I want to show you a technique I like to do. I just like to glaze. I'm going to glaze the whole thing. And then I'm going to start subtracting out so I can, this glaze is going to, this burnt sienna glaze, or this oxide red, will give it a feeling of some kind of warm light. This is an afternoon scene, so I'm going to warm it up. Then I'm going to go in and subtract some of it out and push the warms and cools and just pump them up a little bit. So if I just go in here and I start to glaze, you can see, by the way, this painting is very, very dry. You don't want to glaze on top of you don't want to start glazing on top of a wet painting, then it's just going to mix all the paint. It won't be a pretty sight. But you notice how everything is turning. I'm just sort of warming everything up, but it's just this clear, very clear, translucent glaze. It's that burnt sienna. And even that is kind of nice. You know, if I were to keep that sky as it is, kind of brings everything sort of closer to that sort of warm, like there's that light. That sky's so warm, there's that kind of warmish overall light. That's what John Carlson talks about in his book. He says that he doesn't really like formulas for mixing colors, like certain colors for trees and rocks and mountains. because he says what we're doing is we're painting light, or we're painting the effects of light. And it depends on what kind of light you have and what kind of day it is that will give you a certain coloration of the light. This is a warm afternoon light, so I'm warming up the light quite a bit. And I'll put some of that warm down here. One thing we know is that anything warm tends to come towards us on the picture plane. So that in itself is kind of nice. It just sort of gives this whole wash of kind of this warm light. Now I'm going to do something where I'm going to subtract. I'm going to subtract away some of that glaze, and it will almost appear like I'm painting. But if I just go up in here, and so I know that you know, things that go further away from us get cooler and lighter, as we've discussed in the other videos, and the temperature warms or feels it's more warm as it comes towards us. But if I were just to subtract, just going to subtract a little piece of that glaze out. Look how blue that looks. That's crazy. That's just the painting that I had before I did the glaze. But this is what really makes the idea come to life about color and temperature and even value is always relative to what it's next to. So that spot there is relative to the glaze I just put down. You can see how cool that is. It's almost too cool, but I can go back in and I can tone it back down with some of my warm, and I can adjust it the way I want. And the other way I like to subtract some of my glaze is just taking the edge of the brush and just pulling it out. You can see as I'm pulling that glaze out, you can see how that mountain goes and really starts to cool off like we had before. And then if I want to increase that intensity, since this is my focal point, and we've talked about the mountain, the base of the mountain a little bit closer to it, it's a little darker down here, but I can pull some of that glaze off, give that nice, more intense blue just right in that area. Now what would happen if I took out some of the glaze from these distant trees? You may not see a whole lot of difference here, but what about if I took it out of this shadow right here? Wow, look at that. Look how that shadow cools up quite a bit, almost too much. And I might just, since those are way back there, maybe I'll just take some of that glaze out, because now we're seeing that this is sort of increasing the fill of this distance where I'm keeping this front with the warm glaze, and it's really coming forward, and see how this is going back. I kind of like some of that glaze back there, and I can always go back and add some of my glaze. There, that feels a little better. I liked how I pulled it out there in some of the mountains. All right. So already we've got a nice dramatic pull of warms and cools, especially going right into here. Now what if I were to just pop out some of these highlights on the tree, and I'll watch what happens here. When I pop out some of my little Q-tip here, wow, you can see how just the little tops of the little chunks of paint that I've got there really popping some of those blossoms. Popcorn popping on the apricot tree. There you go, huh? Right before our eyes. And that might be too much. I kind of like how it's coming out, but then I can go back and then just in a subtle way glaze some of that glaze back in, and now we can see how that's popping out of this glaze, but in more of a subtle way. What if I took some of the glaze away from this shadow? Watch how it will really cool up. It will make this more cool off the temperature in that shadow a little bit, and maybe down in here just a little bit. It's kind of nice. Now let's see, what if I were to go back here in the water? Let's go back here where, well, look at that. Look how that just brings that blue back out. Remember when I was talking about in some of the other painting videos that everything is relative, and that if we had warm all over or cool all over, then everything is nothing. But you see here how that warm glaze really makes that little mark something when I pull the glaze away. You see the warmth that's in here, I can pull that and cool that off even more so. That might be a little bit too much again, it might be, but it's kind of nice. It's reflecting some of that blue down here. Let's just pull it down here all the way. Maybe just in one part of the water. See, now the water is becoming a little more interesting because it's not the same all over. I'm pulling some of that light, that color light right here, not all over. I have the tendency to go, oh, that's so cool, that's so beautiful, let's just do it all over. Then if I do it all over, then it's like, well, again, everything is nothing. Kind of defeats the purpose. But that's kind of nice. You see how that just brought my eye back into my focal area here. And I'm just going to leave that over there. If I pull a little bit over there, you'll see how it also that glaze will keep it back. And if I wanted just to knock that back a little bit, again, being a little more subtle. How about down here on these cast shadows? Whoa, look at that. Look how that cooled off those shadows. That's almost too much. That's kind of almost this nice intense green. It's kind of nice though, actually. But I think I'm going to go back and just glaze back a little bit of the warmth back in because it's so different. There we go. That's a little bit more interesting. Remember here we had this, we had a little red spot over here to kind of balance all this weight. And I wonder if I pulled the glaze out of that red spot, if it kind of pops it a little bit more. And how about if I just go in here where these little ducks are. Look at that. Just pop that one out so that they're not all the same. Remember before I did this, they were all the same, like bap, 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 bap. Everything is nothing again. So I pull one spot of that little duck or whatever, and then there's there's the star of the show of the duck. So that's more interesting, right? Instead of like bap, 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 just like we're pulling out some of these blossoms here. And it makes that a little more interesting. It pops that. Now, the one I've been waiting for here, what if we were to take this light back here and just right next to the tree, I'm going to take my Q-tip and then just, I don't know if the camera will pick this up, but that's really appearing like it's popping that light coming across to that green. That's really nice. What if I did a little bit of it on the front? Just right there. Again, this is where the party is. This is where my... And what if I... pulled some of that out, like there's a trail of it. I'm not going to erase the whole, glaze, but just work into it. Then there's sort of this cooler patch that's going through the grass against all the warm. Look how that's changing up the warms and cools, giving it more of a bit of a vibration. It's just a little more exciting. Everything's getting a little more exciting now. Let's see, I've already done this. I don't know if I pulled some of the Now let's pull some of the warmth out of this, as this tree gets up. I want this tree to get lighter as it goes up into the sky. So let's pull some of the, time for a new Q-tip. Let's pull some of this glaze out of here. You can see how that's lightening that up again as it goes up into the sky. So that feels like it's got the atmosphere of the air wrapping around it. And I'll leave that down there. What else could we do here? Sometimes I'll pull some of the glaze out and I'll think, I kind of liked how it was with the glaze. That's why glazes are so great, because it's so forgiving. You can just go back in and add the glaze where you want it. And that part of the water is closer up to me, so that makes sense. But I did like how I erased this out and this blue's coming in here. I'm going to keep that coming into my focal tree here, my focal point. Sort of that blue wrapping around there. Oh, where else could we? How about in the shadows of the mountain? We already pulled some of that away, but I kind of like how the glaze goes over the little bits of our snow. Again, because the glaze is giving you a sense of, like John Carlson says, a sense of the light. The light is unifying everything. The temperature of the light, this particular light is low sunlight that's sort of going into the late afternoon. So we warmed everything up, then we pulled back some of the cools back here. So now we've extended the warms and cools, and it's more interesting, more dramatic, more dynamic, and there's more of kind of this richness to it. So there you go, a little lesson on glazes and subtracting out the glazes and going back and forth. Give it a try.